Spoilers for all of these movies. Welcome to A James Bond Journey, a series where I discuss my thoughts and opinions on the James Bond series after having watched it for the first time ever. Today, we are here to talk about the Timothy Dalton era. Yes, I was originally gonna combine the Dalton and Brosnan eras because those were each the shortest eras, but I figure things would just be more organized if I gave each actor their own video. Now, the Dalton era is barely an era. Dalton was only in 2 Bond movies, making his the shortest era of all. Dalton had been approached as a potential for Bond in the late 60s, early 70s, and declined because he felt he was too young. He was approached again in the late 70s, but didn't like the direction the series had gone in. When approached a third time, Dalton was in the middle of filming Brenda Starr, and Eon was not willing to wait for him to finish, so they went after Pierce Brosnan instead. However, Brosnan was still on Remington Steele, so he was busy himself, and the Broccolis weren't sure they wanted Bond associated with a different character, simultaneously being played by the same actor. Finally, Dalton was finished with Brenda Starr, and could finally, at long last, play James Bond. Timothy Dalton was the first gritty Bond we ever got. There is still some humor in his films, but very little of the humor ever comes from Bond himself. Dalton is notable for actually being the closest to the James Bond depicted in the books out of all the actors who played him. This is because Dalton was a huge fan of the books. He made it a point to capture the literary version of the character in his performance. And what we got was maybe the first Bond who really took himself seriously. This is a James Bond who smiles the least, womanizes the least, has the least quips, and kills the most savagely. This was a Bond who felt like he earned his license to kill, and that he killed on the daily. There's something frightening and deadly in Bond's steely eyes when Dalton plays him. Dalton's Bond was a breath of fresh air after 7 Roger Moore films. The Dalton era was also the one where the Bond franchise finally had to compete with other action franchises. This was now deep into the 80s when the action film genre had really started to fly. You had Rambo, The Terminator, Predator, Commando, Lethal Weapon, and Die Hard now. Bond wasn't the only guy shooting people anymore. And in the Dalton movies, you can see the Bond franchise rising to the occasion, especially in License to Kill. Dalton was perfect for the direction they intended to go in after Moore left. So let's get started. We ain't gonna be here long this time. So, this one's good. It's not crazy good. I don't have much to say about The Living Daylights. In some ways, it feels like a Moore movie that happens to star Dalton. There's still a lingering silliness in it, but he definitely brings it. The movie has a great intro to the new Bond. There's some great line delivery. I love the opening scene where he lands on the boat and there's a hot girl that just happens to be there. I love the 80s twist on the 007 theme. I like that this version of Bond defies orders. The prison fight is good. I do recall the plot of this one being one of the harder to follow plots. And the film has 2 villains, and the main one is less interesting than the other one. So the main villain is this Russian guy whose name I didn't even write down in my notes. I don't think he even dies, he just gets taken away. But he does deal with this American general guy with a stolen valor personality named Whitaker, who's very fun, and I wish he had more screen time. The idea of a villain who uses booby-trapped action figures is so cool. This was definitely a sillier part of the movie. I love the plane scene involving the shoe, even though that line, "He got the boot," was clearly dubbed in post by someone who didn't think of it until after the shot. Though I was confused why Bond hopped in the plane when he knew there was a bomb on it. The ghetto blaster invention was fucking hilarious. This one had a good Bond girl. Bond has genuine chemistry with her, and despite how cold this version of Bond is, he also has a believable tender side. I also found it amusing that this Bond takes the longest to hook up with girls. I actually don't think he even gets any from the Bond girl in this one. This is the first movie where Bond and the girl don't consummate during the course of the movie. Let's see, we finally got a new Moneypenny. Q's still kicking. We see M's house. There's a cool gadget car. We get some tasteful side boob. James Bond helps the Taliban. Yeah, I'm not kidding. He helps the fucking Taliban. There's even a scene where he frees a bunch of them from captivity, and I swear to God, one of them looks like Osama bin Laden. James Bond freed Osama bin Laden in this movie. You may think I'm going over the top with this. If you think that, Here's an actual line their leader says in this movie.
I'm sorry we missed the concert. We had some trouble at the airport.
I'm just going to sit here and let you soak that one up. It took until 1989, but Eon finally decided to make something that they hadn't made before. A truly dark James Bond movie. The result was License to Kill, one of the greatest and most unique films in the franchise. License to Kill felt different. It was different. People had never seen Bond like this before, and it would be a while before we saw him like this again. License to Kill is a revenge story. There is no mission in this one. Bond is acting almost entirely on his own. License to Kill is also, notably, the most violent film in the entire franchise. Some pretty brutal things happen to people in this one, and unlike the vast majority of the rest of the series, this movie isn't afraid to show it and let it linger. In The Living Daylights, Dalton played a new kind of Bond in a regular old Bond movie. In License to Kill, the tone of the movie caught up with the tone of the character. John Glenn holds the record for having directed the most James Bond films, and he directed all 5 of them in a row. His first was For Your Eyes Only, a film that I loathe. This was his last. The absolute jump this guy made in experience and talent from that film to this one shows that if you keep at something, you will get great at it. Things feel different from the very first, as the opening gunshot music is different. We then open on Felix Leiter's wedding day. But where's Felix? He's trying to catch a guy named Frank Sanchez with Bond's help. After a spectacular aerial scene, Bond and Felix parachute into the wedding right on time. Bond kisses the bride on the mouth, that's a little weird, and then a cop asks Sanchez in the interrogation, "Is this one of your $1 million bribes?" Like it's a trademark of his.
Even one of your famous $1 million bribes can't get you out of this one.
Sanchez escapes, and then something real bad happens. Sanchez has his henchman, Dario, played by Benicio del Toro, murder Felix's wife. And nearly him. By shark.
Don't worry. We gave her a nice honeymoon.
Oh god, before they killed her, they... So now that Felix is incapacitated, it's up to Bond to avenge his friends. This leads to some unexpected moments, such as Bond turning on M. Whoa. And I like that Bond isn't really a hero in this one. Him going rogue fucks everything up. The Hong Kong agents are pissed. He spins it around like they were going to assassinate Sanchez. He compromised the mission to get US missiles out of Sanchez's possession. The plot has great twists and turns. Moneypenny and Q still go in to help him anyway, with some of the series' best gadgets including toothpaste. Q also has the most screen time in this of any Bond movie. He gets sucked into the action in this one, and it's great. I love that Bond gets Sanchez to trust him, infiltrating his operation from the inside out. And he doesn't know why Bond is ruining his life until the very end. And before that, we have the best chase scene in the series so far. The truck popping a wheelie, dodging a missile, which was fucking awesome, Bond climbing over multiple trucks. This scene is incredible. The supporting cast shines as much as Dalton does, with Carrie Lowell, Robert Davi, and Benicio del Toro taking their roles extra seriously. Sanchez is such a great fucking villain. A top-tier 007 baddie. He owns a bank, a casino, and a religious infomercial scam, but in the end, he's really just another drug kingpin. But it's his level of brutality that really makes him stand out. This guy kills people in horrifying ways. And Dario, of course, takes a great thrill in helping him do this, always giggling, always excited to help his boss murder. Naturally, though, you reap what you sow in these movies, and when these guys get whacked, it is just as brutal. Both their deaths are fantastic, especially when Bond uses Felix Leiter's lighter that he and Della got Bond as a gift to set Sanchez on fucking fire. This may be the most fitting death in the series. It's so sweet. Not to mention the equally fantastic scene in which the guy explodes inside that pressure chamber. I can't tell if this is cheesy or if this would really happen to someone in a pressure chamber. Or both. But I love it. Out of Dalton's 2 films from his tragically short stint as Bond, this is the film that could not be played by any other Bond actor. This movie was perfect for him. There are so many little moments that make his performance unique. There's a scene where a guy punches his arm playfully, and his reaction is exactly how this Bond would react, but subtle. He's even the only Bond who actually has drama with the 2 women he's banging. Yes, that's right. The Bond who fucks the least women somehow winds up having to choose between them in this one. The irony. And Bond, in the final scene, consciously chooses Pam, where it is inferred that they form some kind of relationship. I kind of love that Dalton was a one-woman Bond in both of these movies. That was different. So I guess in Dalton Bond universe, Bond finds true love, possibly. We never got a new Bond girl for him, so yeah, I guess he had the happiest ending of any Bond. Some other things I love in this movie. I think the electric eel scene is pretty funny and cheesy. A guy gets thrown into a tank with electric eels and they cook him as if it was a toaster getting thrown in a tub. I don't think that's how electric eels work. Or maybe they do. I'm not a zoologist. What the fuck do I know? It's a small tank, but the flashing sparks? Come on. The scene where Bond has the briefcase full of money and the guy he took it off of is dangling above the shark saying, "I'll split it with you." Dude, he has the briefcase already. You have nothing to bargain with. And I'd be remiss if I failed to mention the iguana with the necklace. This little guy just appears all over the place in this movie like a running joke, and I love him. I don't know if there's enough animal characters to have a ranking of greatest James Bond animal characters, but this iguana wins every time. Look at him. And sadly, that was it for Timothy Dalton. So, what happened then? Why did Dalton only get 2 Bond films? In the early 90s, MGM and Eon had a legal dispute because MGM... Okay, this is a complicated story, so I'm going to paraphrase. MGM and United Artists were very briefly bought and owned by Giancarlo Peretti, a slimy businessman who owned a film production company called Pathé Entertainment, and whose brief ownership of MGM and United Artists was a nightmare. He bought the company on lines of credit that he couldn't pay, and, naturally, couldn't pay people working for him on their movies. His creditors eventually wanted him out of there, and he was gonna sell the distribution rights to the James Bond franchise as a last-ditch effort to raise enough money to advance payments on the buyout to save his ass. So this guy was like a real-life version of Jerry Lundegaard from Fargo. Luckily, this didn't work. MGM got a new CEO and rebranded itself as good old MGM. Unluckily, by this time, Dalton's contract as Bond had run out, which is a shame because there was supposed to be a 3rd Dalton Bond film. The rumored title, The Property of a Lady, would have had a more lighthearted tone than the previous 2 movies, which would have been interesting with his portrayal of Bond. Also, Anthony Hopkins was a top contender to play the villain, and a lot of plot elements from this film were reused in the Brosnan films. This dispute was also why we got an unprecedented 6-year stretch between 2 Bond films, the longest period of time between Bond movies until probably the one we're in now. Dalton did want to make one more Bond film, which would have made his era truly feel like one. But by the time the dust had settled and they were ready to make more, a new contract for Dalton would have meant 4 or 5 more movies. Recalling what had happened to the previous Bond actors when they had been stuck in the role, Dalton decided to just move on, which is a shame. Timothy Dalton's Bond was a welcome curveball for this series. A man who made Bond feel more dangerous than he ever had before, and, frankly, one who may have simply been ahead of his time. Many people have said that Dalton walked so Craig could run nearly 20 years later. Even Dalton himself has commented on this. And I will give credit where credit is due. It may not sound fair to say this, and I guess it's not really, but because he was only in 2 Bond films and neither of them sucked, in my opinion, Timothy Dalton was the only Bond who never starred in a bad James Bond movie. 3rd movie or not, this guy can at least walk away with his head held high for that. But because of that, we got the next era of James Bond. One that would prove that James Bond could survive legal disputes and a changing world. And that world, it was not enough. Swish. Guys, thanks for watching. If you like this video, click like, subscribe, and that Patreon link, baby. See you next time.